Michael, don't forget tonight's banquet, my wife exclaimed, her voice rising as she rushed out the door. This is critical for my job, I informed her. Don't worry, I'll be there. After completing my porridge, I put the dishes in the sink and placed my phone on the table, a representation of my desire to disengage for a while. I dashed upstairs and changed out of my work suit into comfortable golf attire. After throwing my clubs and shoes in the car, I went to meet a couple of old friends at a picturesque golf course about 100 meters from the city. We had an appointment at 11:30 p.m., and a crisp autumn day promised to be perfect for a round of golf. Some events in life are simply priceless. We finished the game around 3:30 p.m. and headed to the clubhouse, where laughter and camaraderie reigned. It's been a long time since I've seen Anthony and Elliot, my two college buddies, and our reunion was a great success. We had a hearty dinner, reminisced about the past, and shared stories that were as fresh as an autumn breeze. The fun was so contagious that we decided to make a few more holes before it got dark. That was fantastic, exclaimed Anthony, wiping sweat from his forehead. When we were done, do you have to hurry, or can you join us for another drink? I chuckled. Am I ever going to give up a drink, especially from such a generous loser? Let's go to the local bar. We settled into our favorite bar, sipping cold beers and telling stories about our glory days. I was amazed at how much I enjoyed myself and how much I would like to see Anthony and Elliot more often. But as I approached the house, a threatening cloud began to hang over my good mood. I had already imagined how a storm would break out in my relationship with Elizabeth, imagining her fury. I giggled to myself at the absurdity of my thoughts. Where the hell did you go? She will demand as soon as I enter the door. When I finally entered the living room, her words rang out in full voice. I told you that this banquet is very important to me. You should have been home by 6. I'm sorry, my love. My boss sent me on business. There were terrible traffic jams, and so I just got back, I replied, trying to keep my tone light. You know, I talked to Jeffrey. He was at home at 7:30, according to him. You took time off from work, and you left your cell phone on the kitchen table, so I couldn't reach you. Elizabeth raised her voice with each accusation. You're a terrible liar and a lousy lover. Well, since we've figured it out, I give up, dear, I said with a tired smile. I'm exhausted. Is it decided? What's been decided? She snapped, her eyes flashing with indignation. By this point, Elizabeth was tired of playing charades. You're lying to me, Michael. Will you try to tell the truth for once? I sighed, preparing for the wild fairy tale that had become my reality. Okay, let's get started. I was kidnapped, along with the car, by a gang of pirates. They took me to some dilapidated warehouse, planning to hold me for ransom. But then aliens appeared out of nowhere, dragged me onto their plane, and began to probe me. Well, let's just say they were especially interested in my teeth, eyes, and other sensitive areas. Elizabeth stared at me with an expression of disbelief on her face. Do you think I'll believe that? Honestly, it's true. As soon as they left me alone, I managed to free myself from the ropes that bound me. And then the real test began. It was necessary to understand how to control their spacecraft. Anyway, I accidentally landed in an unknown place from there. I had to hitchhike to my car with a truck driver, but I feel surprisingly good, just a little tired. Elizabeth's expression changed from disbelief to pure disappointment. It seemed like it was about to explode. Michael, what are you talking about? Stop talking nonsense. Do you even realize how much that banquet meant to me? I was promoted, and you were supposed to be my plus one. It was very awkward to show up without you. I actually played golf with Anthony and Elliot, my old college buddies. I admitted, waving off her outrage. At first, they had me at gunpoint, but on the 7th hole, I smashed them 30 feet. I've been on a roll ever since. Is this a new putter? It's just a masterpiece, I swear. I'm hitting 300-yard playing golf. Elizabeth repeated, disbelief in her voice. You knew how important this dinner was to me, and you decided to play golf instead. Did you really plan everything in advance? I didn't mean to hurt your feelings, so I cheated a little. I thought maybe you wouldn't find out. She confessed, trying to justify herself. I don't recognize it. Do you think I won't notice the empty chair next to me? Elizabeth fired back, her anger palpable. Why did you decide that I wouldn't be offended by your absence from such an important event? You should have known what it meant to me. After pausing, I realized the depth of my mistake. If you look back, I probably should have seen this coming, I muttered, still overwhelmed by the whirlwind of emotions bubbling between us at that moment. I felt excited and undeniably different. Events were unfolding in a whirlwind, and the last thing I wanted to do was hurt you. It's just golf, I thought. Nothing personal. Are you out of your mind? Or did you and your old buddy overdo it a little bit, Michael? Elizabeth replied, her eyes narrowed. You sound like you're in another universe, to be honest. I'm too exhausted to deal with your selfish antics today. You can spend the night in one of the old children's rooms, she continued, her voice cold and distant. Don't even think about touching me or talking to me for a while. No problem, dear, I replied, dropping to an exaggerated whisper. Elizabeth stared at me as if I were some kind of strange creature she had never encountered before, heading to Kevin's room. I couldn't help but chuckle. After 24 years of marriage and 2 college kids, Elizabeth and I were sailing the uncharted waters of an empty nest. I settled into Kevin's bed and dozed off while the events of the day repeated themselves in my head like a broken record. When morning came, I was getting dressed for work, reading the newspaper, and eating cereal when Elizabeth came into the room with an expression of irritation and determination. Be careful, Michael. Don't think I've dealt with you, she warned, her voice firm. You still have a lot to do if you hope to catch up on yesterday. And just so you know, I'll be working late tonight, so you can start your penance by cooking dinner for yourself. Of course, honey, I replied, trying not to strain myself. I'll do fine. Have a good time. She pressed, raising her eyebrows. Have a great day. Be happy. Don't worry about me, and beware of wooden nickels, I added with a casual shrug. After giving me a look that could curdle milk, she turned on her heel and went to work. I picked up the phone and called the office, pretending to be sick to get a day off. This morning started with an impromptu shopping trip in the store. I came across the main temptation, the largest flat-screen TV imaginable. I couldn't resist and immediately ordered it with same-day delivery. By the evening, everything was ready, and I leaned back in my chair to watch the news. The female presenter looked so real that I tried to look into her cleavage, confident that she was right here in the room with me. The living room was dominated by the TV, a colossal presence blocking access to the closet, but it was worth every penny. I called a few friends from work, inviting them to the opening of the World Series, and ordered pizza and ribs from one of the local establishments. During the third goal, Elizabeth came into the room, and her expression was priceless. Completely amazed, she stood speechless. Harry's accountant, as opportunistic as ever, jumped to his feet to greet her. Congratulations on the improvement. This TV is simply amazing. The old man is lucky to have a wife like you, he exclaimed, and his enthusiasm echoed through the room. Elizabeth's confused gaze darted between me and the game, and I couldn't help but grin, feeling a mixture of mischief and triumph. Thank you, Elizabeth paused, a note of uncertainty in her voice. I'm really tired, so I'll leave you to watch the game and go to bed. What's the matter? To my surprise, she seemed to take the news calmly. I wondered how furious she would be in the morning. I was already dressed for work, sipping coffee and looking through the morning newspaper, when Elizabeth burst into the kitchen. Get that damn thing out of here, and get back to the store before I get back from work tonight. Michael, can you hear me? I hear you, dear, I replied with a playful grin. Don't shout, I'm not deaf. When the door slammed shut, its frame shook as if the glass might break. Sometimes it was hard to keep up with her. That evening, I was sitting comfortably before the game when Elizabeth burst into the living room. I thought I asked you to return this thing today, she began, raising her voice. You said that you heard me, and that I didn't need to raise my voice, and so I come home, and she's still here. What part of it didn't you understand, you idiot? To be honest, I didn't get it. To be honest, I've never understood how attractive Norm is in this show. He's not even that funny. Indignation turned her face crimson, and foam and saliva almost gushed out of her mouth. Michael, hear me? I wanted you to return the TV, but you didn't. I didn't buy this thing to return it, dear. I couldn't help but smile. I like him, and I'm going to keep him. I leaned back, enjoying the moment. I understood every word you said this morning. In fact, the fact is that I just decided not to follow your orders, and nothing more. A look of disbelief appeared in Elizabeth's eyes. What's happened to you lately, Michael? First, you miss an important event under some ridiculous pretext, and then you immediately order this huge, certainly expensive TV without even discussing it with me. Are you all right? There was a note of genuine concern in her voice. I feel great, dear. Thank you for the question. I chuckled softly. If I had told you about the TV, you would have refused right away. It was easier for me that way. No need to argue. No need to worry. And the great thing is, it doesn't hurt anyone except for me, of course. Besides you, Michael? She asked incredulously. But I grinned. No one, dear. Just me. I'm in terrible pain, snarled Elizabeth, her displeasure palpable. The thing is just too big for this room. I can't even put a vacuum cleaner in here. As a result, you spent a fortune on something that wasn't even suitable for our house and didn't even think to consult me. Why do you believe that it won't hurt anyone? You know, when you say that, it's like you don't understand anything. I can't just do what makes me happy without thinking about how it will affect you. Really, Michael, you've never done anything like this before. So why do I have to teach you the same thing all the time? Asked Elizabeth, desperation creeping into her voice. You're acting like a narcissistic boy, she continued. Yes, I know you're right, I admitted, feeling the weight of her words. I'll return the TV on Monday, I offered. Weekly, I'd like you to do it tomorrow, she insisted. I have to work for a few hours in the afternoon. Working on a Saturday is frustrating, of course, but it's thanks to her that I got a promotion, Elizabeth reasoned, her tone softening a little. Please just make sure he's gone by the time I get back tomorrow night. Of course, I nodded, but my thoughts flowed in different directions. I stared at the TV, lost in thoughts of the star of my daydreams. On Saturday afternoon, I decided to call Elizabeth's parents and invite them to lunch. When I arrived at the cafe, I introduced them to Barbara Wright, who was already waiting for me. Barbara looked exhausted, and I wondered how she was coping. Meanwhile, Elizabeth's parents seemed much more interested in the free lunch I was giving them than in anything else. At about 3 o'clock, we followed Barbara to her house and parked at the entrance. Barbara received us in her beautifully decorated living room, but the atmosphere quickly changed when she approached the security console. After a few quick taps, the room erupted into a cacophony of sirens, warning all intruders to flee. The sudden noise sent chills down our backs, and before we could react, the front door burst open, and Barbara's husband, Robert, jumped out with a bat at the ready. The man was completely naked, confusion and adrenaline mixing in his behavior. He didn't recognize me or Elizabeth's parents and swung the bat in our direction with wild eyes. Get out of here before I knock your brains out, he shouted, panic and aggression mixing in his voice. There was tension in the room, and we all froze, caught off guard. Go to the devil, he shouted, pulling the bat back as if preparing to swing. For a moment, I thought about giving it to him. Then a shrill scream shattered the tension. What are you doing here? Elizabeth's parents turned away from the sight of the naked baseball player, their gazes fixed on Elizabeth, who was standing in the doorway, clutching a sheet to her body. Shock and embarrassment reflected on her face. I invited them to have some fun, Mrs. Nelson, Barbara interjected, walking into the room with a mischievous twinkle in her eyes. Robert was not very secretive about his affairs, and I had suspicions as soon as I told him that I would be coming over for the weekend. I even thought it would be you, Mrs. Nelson, considering how cozy he was with you at the banquet last night. Nodding politely to Elizabeth's parents, I was still trying to make sense of the scene unfolding in front of me. Walking up to Barbara, I shook her hand, then turned my attention to Elizabeth's boss, Robert. Only then did I meet Elizabeth's gaze. You know what? There's a game tonight, and I'm not going to miss it on my big screen. When you're done here, you'll take your parents home, Elizabeth, I added, raising an eyebrow. I think they won't mind. Mind giving me a minute to grab some things during the commercial? Although the TV was banned as soon as the match was over, I gathered Elizabeth's clothes and carried them into the living room. When Elizabeth entered the room, her face expressed a mixture of defiance and despair as she examined the pile of her belongings. Michael, don't do this, please. It was just a novel, and nothing more. I never wanted you to get hurt. You shouldn't have found out, she pleaded, despair filling her voice. Why didn't I notice this empty chair? I snapped, pointing out the glaring absence. This marriage meant everything to me, and you just left him for an affair. But I love you. Not him at all, she continued, her voice trembling. Perhaps this is really the case, or maybe not, I replied, my heart pounding wildly from the weight of her words. It doesn't make any sense now, does it? When I decided to play golf during that big event that meant so much to you, you were furious. Those were your words, not mine. But isn't sleeping with the boss worse than making a couple of holes, Elizabeth? I'm the only one who really suffers, but you have no idea. Michael, Dad threw a torrent of humiliation at me. They think I'm some kind of desperate girl, and now I can't even work with Robert. Shouldn't we forget about my little indiscretion, Elizabeth? She pleaded, her voice trembling with despair. Your affair with another man? This can be ignored, I replied, keeping my tone even. Soon, tears flowed down her cheeks as I continued. Lies, betrayal, broken trust. These are the real obstacles. You've been getting a taste of this pain from me lately. It's unbearable to coexist with such a person, isn't it? Take your things with you, Elizabeth. My lawyer will contact you on Monday. You can keep it, but you're not welcome here anymore. Forgiving Cheater, our marriage was broken into small pieces, just like Bradley. Thanks to our prenuptial agreement, she was left with what she came into our marriage with. I didn't just make her family hate her. I left this woman with nothing. Now she's officially broke,